Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. Today, we're going to be talking about the WCM Institutional Data Repository for Research, otherwise known as WIDRR for short. We have Sarah Ben-Mamar, who's the Associate Director of Research Services for the Wood Library. Thank you, Sarah, so much for joining us. We'll be giving an overview of how to use this tool, as well as how it might come in handy for some upcoming policy changes for data storage and sharing for the National Institutes of Health, as well as just complying with Cornell University guidelines as well. Before we begin, I just wanted to let everyone know, we do expect a lot of people on today's session, so we've muted everybody just to prevent any background noises during the presentation. However, if you do have any questions at any time, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be stopping periodically just to take everybody's questions and make sure they're all answered. We're also recording today's session. So after the session is over, expect an email later today with a link to the video recording so you can catch up and watch it later if you need to, or share it with some colleagues who may not have been able to join. And it'll also include some helpful links that Sarah talks about today, so you can access helpful information about using the tool. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Sarah. Sarah, again, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa, for the nice introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining. So I'm going to share my slides really quick here, and we're going to start. So today, I'm going to give a small presentation of, it's more a demonstration, actually, of this new tool that we built to help you all comply with the new Cornell University Data Management and Retention Policy. This tool is called the Weill Cornell Medicine Institutional Data Repository for Research, or WIDRR. It is currently in beta version, so obviously we welcome any feedback that you may have on this. And hopefully you'll have a better idea at the end of this presentation on how to use that. If you have any question on this, please do not hesitate to contact the Wood Library or myself. You can see my contact information right here at the bottom. All right. So the agenda for today is first to go through a quick description of the Cornell University new data management and retention policy. And then I'll follow up with a small overview of the WIDRR tool that I just mentioned. And I'll finish with live demo of the tool. So hopefully you all can see how all this works. So first of all, I wanted to go through really quick on why you're being asked to do this. Well, this is obviously because there is this new Cornell University data management and retention policy. And this policy is trying to foster the use of the FAIR principle, which means that your data set should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Those principles are heavily fostered by the NIH. And this is why it will help you comply with also the new NIH data management and sharing policy coming into effect January 25th, 2023. It is also important to note that following this policy will help you comply with federal, state, and local regulation. And most importantly, I wanted to highlight that according to the Cornell University policy, it is the researcher's responsibility to be able to answer any inquiries about their research, to make sure their research is reproducible, that they follow good research integrity principles. And for Cornell University, the principal investigator is the data custodian of the data sets they produced. So you're probably all familiar with this, what we call research data lifecycle. So you know that when you start thinking of an idea of or a question, a scientific question to address, you start by the envision part. So you think about your question, you then plan some experiment to hopefully answer your question. And then you start also collecting and generating data based on your experiments. You then go ahead and process and analyze your data sets. And then once you're done, you think about how to share and use or reuse these data sets through publication and others. But then at the final stage comes the time where you think of what should I keep and what should I discard in terms of data set. And this is exactly where the WIDRR tool is designed to help you with. So when exactly is the Cornell University policy asking you to retain your data? Well, it's mostly in the case of 3 events that we call milestone. The first event is when you publish a paper. The second event is when your grant just ended. And the third event is when you're about to leave Weill Cornell Medicine. According to the Cornell University policy, you have to keep your data for at least 6 years after the publication date or the grant closeout date. And every time your data set gets cited in another paper, you have to add 6 more years of retention time. According to we usually advise, and this is following Cornell University policy, to archive your data between 30 and 60 days after your publication date or your project, your grant closeout date. And you also are required to archive your data sets 60 days before you leave Weill Cornell Medicine. Now, there are some additional caveats. For example, if your data set is already deposited somewhere, for example, let's say in an NIH repository, all what you need in that case is just to create a WIDRR record. So we know that your data set is already hosted somewhere, and we know where. It is also important that you archive your data set prior to any irrevocable modification to the data set. So that is why you need to mostly archive your raw data sets. So what are we asking you to do exactly? Well, in fact, using WIDRR is creating a record of the location of your data sets. This is what WIDRR aims at. If, as I mentioned, if you already deposited your data set somewhere in a public repository, for example, well, all what you need is just to provide a pointer to the location of your data set in this repository. So acceptable places to deposit your data are, for example, national public repositories or journals. If you have any doubts, please do not hesitate to contact the library. Myself or my colleagues, we're more than happy to help you with any questions or assistance you may need. During the process of archiving your data in WIDRR, you will need to specify a milestone. So why are you archiving your data? And then create a scientific project that is basically describing in general, your project, what your project is about. You'll also be prompted to provide a methods file, which is a file that will explains all the analytical steps that you apply to your raw data set to achieve the published form of your data set. You're also more than welcome to check our library website and the WIDRR tutorial. This is the link to the website. You have a lot of information there. There's a WIDRR tutorial, as I mentioned, but also a lot of other resources regarding the new NIH and Cornell University data management and sharing policy. So please do not hesitate to check it out. In general, what kind of data do you really need to archive? You have to think in terms of publication. What kind of data are you likely to publish in the future? Any of these data should be archived or retained. But if you have any doubts or any question, again, please do not hesitate to contact the Weill Library and ask us. So how are we asking you to do that exactly? Well, as I mentioned, through the WIDRR tool. But what is really this WIDRR tool? WIDRR consists of 2 parts. The first part is a data catalog, which is the essential part of the tool. And the second part is a data archiving tool. And this tool is particularly required if your data is not already deposited in a WCM accepted alternative repository. So that means, for example, an NIH repository, for example, among others. If you have done already this step, you still need to create a record in WIDRR, but that will be much simpler and faster to do that. So the way to create an entry in WIDRR is 2 ways. So there is a 1-step data retention form that is the fastest way. And there is a 4-steps wizard, which is anyway fast, but we usually recommend, if you're very new with WIDRR, to first start with the 4-steps wizard, because it will really walk you through all the steps that you need to go through to do your archiving properly. You'll also be prompted to create metadata that you will associate to your raw data set. And this metadata is basically a description of your data set. This is what will be used within the data catalog, the WCM data catalog, to make your data visible. Your data metadata be visible, not your data set necessarily. You can choose to make your data shareable, accessible by others, or not. To the bare minimum, you can just make your data visible, so like people know that your data set exists, but they cannot really access your data or even see it if you choose not to share. Now, just a quick overview of the WIDRR tool, especially the wizard, so you understand a little bit the general workflow here. So the first thing you will need to do if you're not on campus, obviously, is to connect to the VPN, and then you need to log into the Data Core webpage. I'll show you all this live right after. Next step is to record a milestone. So you need to choose the reason why you were asking to retain your data. So that could be because you just published, or your grant just ended, or because you're about to leave Cornell Medicine. Once you have specified the milestone, you would be asked to create a scientific project. So here you can, if you have never created any project, you will be prompted to create a new one. But if you have already created a project before, you can just select among the one that are already that you already created before. The next step is then within this project to associate the location of your data set. So basically say, where is your data located? Again, if you have already used WIDRR before and you have already created a data set location record, you can use this. If not, then you'll have to create a new one. And during this process, you have the option, as I mentioned, to create a data catalog entry to make your data visible to the WCM community. Visible, not necessarily shareable, you choose if you want to make your data accessible or not. Last step is basically a recap step, is you will have a small form that you have to go through just to check all the information you entered was correct. And once you're happy with that, you can just go ahead and click submit, and you're basically done. All right, so let's now jump into a small, I'm gonna stop sharing really quick and share again. I want to show you how the website works exactly. There you go. So this is the welcoming page for WIDRR. So you can see the address right here. This is https //datacore.wellcornell.edu. And when you first log in, you land on this page. So you'll be prompted to enter your WCM credentials. So the first thing you want to do here is to click on this yellow button here that says login. That's what I'm doing. And it recognizes me because I'm on the VPN, but usually you would have to go through your usual WCM credential authentication and so on. Right, so once you are here, the way to proceed with WIDRR is to click on this blue button that says new retention request. I go ahead and I immediately land on this wizard that I just mentioned to you. This is the very first step of the wizard. So what it is asking you here is to choose a milestone. So for example, here I'm gonna say I just published. So I'm gonna choose that, and you can see that when you choose publication, now it's asking me the DOI of my publication. So I'm gonna put the DOI just here for fun. And you have also to add a publication date. I'm gonna keep this as today. Here you're also invited to enter any comments. So typically what I would imagine you would say here is something like this paper is part of this bigger project about X and Y. It relates to this other paper, a part of this Z project, for example. So just an idea. You can obviously it's a free text box, so you can add whatever you think is relevant and important to notify the person who is gonna take care of your data archiving. So once I'm happy with that, I can click here, continue to project details, and then I'm prompted to enter more information. This is the second step of the wizard. And this is where you are invited to create a project. So obviously, because I played a lot with this tool, you can see that I have a lot of them here existing, but you will probably not have anything here. So what you need to do is to create a new project. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. I'm going to call it very original name, test project. And then I'm going to add a description. These projects is about, I don't know, X number of patients, covers this period, and is about, I don't know, A, B, and C. Something like this. Obviously, you're welcome to put anything that you think is relevant. So it's again, it's a field, it's a free text box, so use it as you want. Next step is then to choose for the PI of the project. So you can click on in here, you see a drop-down menu. I'm gonna look for myself, for example. I can look with my CWID, and here I am. I'm popping up here. You can then add any other PI that is involved in your project. So you can have several of them. I'm gonna put, just for fun, myself again. Here, you can add another one. For example, let's put Peter Oxley. Fine here. There you go. So you can populate with as many PI as needed here. Next field is to enter any other editors. So typically, other editors field is for people that are not permanent to Weill Cornell medicine. So, for example, postdocs positions or grad students. This is where those people would put their name. It's all like facultative. You're welcome to do that or not. All the people listed in those three fields will have editing rights to this record. So it's important to think about this when completing this form. Next step is to provide a WRG ID. So it's basically providing the name of your grant. So you can put something like this. You see, I have put 2 of them here. And next step is to provide a completion date. Again, I'm going to put the date of today here. Once I have done this, I can go ahead, click save and continue. And now I immediately move to the third step, which is basically specifying where my data sets are located. So same system here. You can see that if you have not created a dataset record location before, then your thing here will be empty, because I created a new project. There is no dataset record, dataset location record created yet. There is nothing here that I can choose from. So what I have to do is to go through this form and create a dataset location record. So I'm going to go ahead, click, I'm going to add a name for this dataset, and then I'm going to choose the storage type on which the dataset is located. So for example, if your dataset is located in data core, you would be prompted to provide a file path, the absolute file path of your where is exactly your dataset is located. If you already deposited your dataset in a public repository, then you just need to provide a link of where your dataset is located. You can also choose to directly upload your file, so you can browse and pick some files from your local computer. You have a bunch of other options, but here, just for the sake of this demonstration, I'll go ahead and put OneDrive or OneNote, for example. And so when I choose OneDrive or OneNote, I'm prompted to add a link. So that would point directly to the dataset, which I just did here. Next step is, this is where you are prompted to create a data catalog entry if you want. This is to make your dataset metadata visible within the data catalog. You're not forced to do that. But if you want to do that, you can choose to connect your data set to an existing data catalog entry available here, or you can decide to create a totally new entry, and you would have to click on this green button that will prompt you to fill out this form and click submit, and then you'll be done. For the sake of this demonstration, I'll skip over this, but it is important to note that if your dataset is restricted in terms of access, you can just provide access instructions so people know how they can potentially access this dataset if it's possible. You can also add a contact email so people know who to ask any questions about this dataset. And here, importantly, you can choose if you want to make your dataset also accessible, so people can click on the link and access directly your dataset or not. So you can choose. So since I'm happy with this, I can go ahead and click create and add to project. And you can see that my dataset record location has just been now transferred to the right side. It's populating this list of all data location field. So you can add as many dataset location record as you want. They will continue popping up here and populating this particular field. Next step is to provide a methods file. So we provide a download template to give you an idea of the information that we request people to have in their methods file. This is just an indication, but ideally, this is the kind of information we would ask. So, for example, the analysis steps that were performed to produce a particular figure, what were the input and output files, which software did you use, what parameters, the version, and the code repo URL if you have any. Again, this is just an indication. You are not forced to use this template at all, but it's just to give you an idea of what would be ideally expected. You can also perfectly use the material and methods section of your paper if it fits the definition of, if it describes all the analytical steps that you perform on your data up to the published form of your data set. So you can also just click browse and select any, for example, any, well, I'm not choosing the right thing, obviously, but it's just to show you that you can browse your file and select one. I'm gonna click continue, and now I'm reaching out the end of the wizard, which is the last step 4, which is, as I mentioned, just a recap of all the information I entered so far. You can see that there is a retention request name that is generated automatically for you. You're welcome to change that to something more meaningful for you. So you can put something, maybe, I don't know, like retention request or test project, for example, here. But by default, it will create a name for you with the date and the time at which it was created. You can see the milestone that I choose here, the project name that I gave to the project, the milestone pointer that I provided, because I said that I just published. So here I provided a DOI, the milestone date, which data set, location record I'm associating to this project, what is my methods file. You can still change it right here. If you click browse, you can totally change this methods file right there. You can see also the comments I added relating to this project. And if you're happy with that, you can just go ahead, click submit retention request, and you're done, basically. So this is what you would see at the summary page for your record. You see like the name of the dataset record, dataset location record, and you can see a summary of the information you entered. You can still update your retention request details up to about 10 days after you deposited your request. And you can also see the methods file that you deposited. So if you click on it, you see that it's downloading it. And you can also look at your data set. If I click on this button here, go to data, you'll see what I added, right? There was a file. You can also click on this and view the record. This is where all the data, metadata of your data set is basically living. So you can create more metadata if you want. You can click on that, or just visit your data set as I mentioned before. So if I click on it, you see the file that I uploaded. And I think that's it. So with this, I'll stop here. Just wanted to show you, maybe to finish, that if you go to view details on the top left, you can see all the projects that you have created, and you can check each of them with like additional details for each of those projects. So don't hesitate to also look at that. This will be all your records. Okay. And I think with this, I'll stop here, and happy to take any question if there is any.
Yeah, I've gotten a few questions while you've been doing the demo. We've got a multi-part question here. What if you have just published one article, but have several ongoing analyses and plan to publish more papers? How can we confirm that once we archive the data, people will not start working on the same analyses? Shouldn't the archiving happen once the authors are finished with all of the analyses to ensure duplication doesn't happen?
So that's a great question. And in general, I would say yes. It's better to wait for an analysis or like a study to be done to archive. That said, if you want to avoid to have like a lot of things to archive by the end of your project, we also encourage people to create a record. So you can start creating a record in WIDRR and then leave it like that for a while. You're not forced to finish it right away. You can go back later and finish it once you have all the necessary data sets available, and etc. I hope that answers the question. But in general, we encourage people obviously to anticipate. It's more like workload management, obviously. So if you can create, start creating things like as you go and then complete them as they finish, it's probably better for you. But you're free to do that at any time, basically.
Okay, great. Another multi-part question. Is there a request form for people to access the data? Does the request require details on exactly what analysis will be done? And is there a database of all analyses that show what has been done and or are ongoing to ensure duplication doesn't happen? So a little bit similar to what you were discussing, but regarding how to request the data, I guess.
Okay, so I hope I answered correctly the question, but let me know if I didn't. So I think what you would likely need to do is, so to answer the question of the database for the analytical steps, so your methods file will be stored along with your data, your projects, basically. So that will be stored and archived. It is best indeed to finish your archiving request once you're sure that your project won't move anymore, or like your data set won't move anymore. So it's kind of a final shape. Then it is best to archive it as at this stage. That said, I want to emphasize that what we ask is really the raw data sets, not necessarily the processed data sets. It's very important to remember that. And then I don't know if I answered the question. Maybe Vanessa, can you help me? Did I miss anything?
if this person comes back with a follow-up, I'll bring it up.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Is the lead author who collected the data notified when people are requesting or accessing data?
Oh, good question. So once you have put like your contact email information in there, this is what people will see on the data catalog entry. And this is probably what they will use to contact you and get more information. We can keep track of, this is not currently available as a feature, but this is something we can probably work on. So keeping track of who is accessing your data within WCM. But if you make your data publicly available, you probably won't be able to see immediately who is downloading or using your data, not directly. But we can definitely work on that. That's a great suggestion, actually.
Does WIDRR have any data size limits?
No, there is no data size limit. You can archive anything of any size, and you can also archive any PHI, so you don't need your data to be de-identified. Obviously, you won't be sharing them in that case. It's important to note, though, that as much, we encourage, like the institution encourages you as much as possible to deposit your data in a public repository, because this is requested by the NIH data management and sharing policy. Really use WIDRR as more like kind of a place where you would deposit your data if there is really nothing else, no other repository to use for your data set, because you really want to make sure that your data set is visible to your peers and is likely to be reused. So WIDRR is not the best place for that. WIDRR is really designed to help you comply with the Cornell University policy, but it doesn't meet the NIH sharing requirements, which requires you to make your data shareable and accessible when applicable, obviously. So that means when you don't have any PHI or PII information in there. So I hope that answers the question.
We have someone who's just kind of seeking clarification. If I store data on a WCM file share and then make a data retention request, does WCM then take care of making sure this data is permanently archived?
Yes, thank you for the question. Absolutely. We make sure the data is archived for you. You just need to point to where it's located.
Perfect. I believe you just mentioned this a little while ago, because you mentioned the PHI data, but somebody is just requesting clarification. Is WIDRR okay for HIPAA protected data?
Yes, it is perfectly okay for HIPAA protected data. I want to emphasize this part though. It is really important if you have data that needs to be shared to deposit it in an NIH or any other available public repository of your choice. And then once you have done that, you can create a record in WIDRR to indicate to the institution, okay, I have put my data over there. If it's not possible for you to share your data because it has PHI or those kind of thing, then put it into WIDRR and we'll make sure it is archived for you and that nobody will be able to access it besides the one person that will archive the data for you.
Great. Somebody asked, if I publish a paper that has 4 different types of data sets, should each of these be one data set or like should they upload as different data sets or should they all be part of one data set essentially?
I would say upload them as different data sets for clarity. So if you have a publication with 4 different data sets, then upload each of them separately. So we can go ahead and you have to think of like the person who will click on your link, for example, and grab the data set for you. If you put all of them in the same file, that won't be very readable. And it's also for yourself, like to know exactly which data set you are managing and are responsible for. So yeah, try to keep them separate as much as you can.
Got it. Can you have editors from outside of Weill Cornell, especially for MPI projects?
So that's a great question. Yes, you can. What you need to have is, well, the person would need to have a CWID. That's the thing. So you can request this person for this person to have a CWID. That said, I want to emphasize something. You're really only responsible for the data set that you generate. So if you're working with partners or collaborators and they are sharing some data that all come up being in the same publication along with your data, you really need to take care of your data, your part of the data, not the others technically. So technically you shouldn't need, I mean, not that often somebody outside of WCM to have access to WIDRR, but it is possible to request access through a CWID. You definitely need a CWID to access WIDRR.
What about CMS database projects?
So they are available, you can definitely put them into WIDRR. There is no issue with that. As I mentioned, if you have identifiable information, WIDRR is perfectly compatible with this. So I don't think there is any issue. I mean, if I didn't answer the question right, please let me know. But I don't think there will be any issue with CMS data.
This actually might be a question for our OneDrive team, but maybe you've run into this, Sarah. How do we ensure OneDrive links persist after the user leaves Weill Cornell? Have you run into that with somebody uploading that data into WIDRR and then leaving the institution?
So that's a great question. There are ways for us to extend the life of a OneDrive folder. So even if you leave Weill Cornell Medicine, that doesn't mean that your OneDrive folders are completely wiped out. So we'll have ways to preserve those. And if you do that before you leave Weill Cornell Medicine, your data set within OneDrive will be archived within WIDRR anyway. So there will be a copy at the institution in any case, even if your OneDrive account gets deleted for some reason. So I hope that answered the question.
Perfect. If we have published our data sets on, and forgive me if I mispronounce this, GeoNIH or GEONIH, do we still need to create a WIDRR record?
Yes, that's a great question. Thank you, Nancy, for asking that. For omics, so the field of omics has a long history of depositing data in repositories. So I think a lot of people are doing that, have been doing that for a long time now. The only thing that we need from these people is to really let us know where is your data set living. So you need to create a WCM deposit, but just to indicate through a link. You remembered when in the demo that I gave you right now, there was a storage type option that was saying public repository. This is what you would choose, public repository, and you would provide a link that would point to this data set. And that's it, and that's all you would need to do.
Perfect. What about data use agreements? Must WIDRR be mentioned in them?
That's a great question. We currently don't manage data use agreement because, but we might in the future. We don't need any data use agreement to be archived currently within WIDRR. But if you need to, yes, sorry, I just read the question. What about data use agreement? Must WIDRR be mentioned in them? You can mention WIDRR in your data use agreement as a way to, it will be like the ultimate retention of your data sets. So you can definitely mention WIDRR, yes, in your data use agreement. But I mean, I would encourage you to mention it. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but I would defer maybe to the IRB to be sure about this.
Yeah, speaking of the IRB, I actually just got another question. Do we need to update IRBs saying that we will archive the data in WIDRR now?
Oh, that's a great question. I would think better if you do, but I have not heard any special like requirement regarding this right now. So I would say better to be safe than to be sorry. So I would say yes. But there is no currently any obligation to do so. At least I haven't heard that yet.
And we have another question, just seeking clarification. Just to be explicit, WIDRR will download its own copy of the data links to a file share, OneDrive, public repository, and keep for the required amount of time?
Yes, that's right. So if you tell me that your data set is in OneDrive or in a public repository, whatever link you provide, this link will be used to get access to the data. The data will be copied in a archive for you and will stay in WIDRR for as much as needed, as long as needed.
Is the policy about WIDRR only for omics related data? What other type of data do we need to deposit?
That's a great question. This is absolutely not only for omics data. This is for all raw data set that you produce throughout your research. So that includes images, that includes sequencing data, that includes mass spec data, all kind of raw data set that you produce and that is likely to be published in the future. So I know that a lot of people may wonder, okay, I'm doing a lot of assays in the lab. Some of them are leading nowhere. Should I really archive those data? And the answer pretty much is no. We really need only the data set that is likely to be published in the future. So the raw data set, the raw data. Yeah.
Perfect. We got to the end of the questions. We do have a few minutes. So if anybody does have another question for Sarah, we do have about 5 minutes left. Feel free to put it in the chat. Oh, here we go. Please describe the diligence of monitoring citations of work. That sounds like it requires a new 6-year retention period. Yes,
that's correct, Tom. So basically, every time your work is cited or your data set is reused, you need to add 6 more years of retention time. You shouldn't need to worry because WIDRR will do it for you. WIDRR will keep the data set as long as needed. You just really need to create a WIDRR entry. But if your data set needs to be kept for 50 years, it will be kept for 50 years within WIDRR. So yeah.
I think you just answered another question that came up. How do you ensure the data is stored for an additional 6 years after a grant closes or a new citation there's a new citation in the future?
This will be done for you automatically, so you don't need to worry about that. Once it's in WIDRR, it will be retained for as long as needed. So,
oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, complete your thought.
So, yes. I see a question in the chat from Tom. So we need to inform WIDRR after any citation? No, you don't need to inform WIDRR. We know we can track those citations for you.
Is a link to Mendeley repository for the other type raw data accepted?
I think so. You can definitely, yes, you would use likely the public repository storage type. And provide a link that would link to your data set within Mendeley repository. So yes.
Will WIDRR automatically delete data after 6 years if there's no new citations?
That's a good question. I don't think so, because the institution will keep record as long as needed, and I don't think so. But that's a very good question. I don't have any further information about this. I'm suspecting that it will likely not be the case. They will keep the data as long as possible. Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up? I think I got to all of them. I just want to make sure. Yeah. When do we have to start?
That's a good question. Technically, you need to start now if you have not already. The Cornell University policy is already in effect. It was posted in July 11th, 2022. So you can start now. But this really applies, it's not retrospective, so that really applies to any publication that comes out after, let's say, July 11th, 2022. So yeah, feel free to start at any time from now on.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
I see one last question.
Oh, you do? Okay, go ahead, because I know you might be getting some direct messages.
Yes, from Angeles Duran Molina. Thanks, Angeles. So what type of cloud storage is accepted if you do not use OneDrive? We can probably accept any AWS cloud storage or any other storage that is currently offered by WCM. But we can work with you if you're using any other cloud storage. We are happy to work with you and help you back up the data. Just reach out to us and we'll put you in contact with the right people in ITS to help you do that.
All right. Well, I think that we are good. I think we got everybody's questions. I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about WIDRR. And many, many thanks to Sarah for hosting this session and answering everybody's questions. Again, I'll be sending out a link to this recording so you can reference it whenever you'd like. That'll be out later today, as well as some helpful links about the WIDRR tool and how you can access it. So thank you, everybody, again. Thanks, Sarah, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.